Okay, so this is the scene in the situation. I go out this place a couple of times a week and meet my friends and so on and so forth. And I've got this like problem whereby I always turn up early. So they got a library nearby, so I went into the library and I always go down like either the self-development section because it helps me with my customers, or I go down to the occult section because like that's interesting. And there was just one book there, and it was just about the ancient grimoires and where they came from. And I picked it up and I started reading it. And what I thought was like really, really curious about this one chapter was because it focused around what happened like before and what happened after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone. Now, for those of you who don't know, I mean, my knowledge is a bit scant on this subject anyway, but it's like something the archaeologists discovered, which provided them with knowledge about how different ancient languages and also like the ancient hieroglyphics could actually like what they could mean. So from the use of the Rosetta Stone, we could then get cool things like the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the Egyptian Book of the Dead and all that kind of stuff, which is obviously like awesome. And then you get factual understanding as to, or a much greater understanding of factual understanding as to what like the ancient Egyptians and Babylonians and all those other people like out there in various different tribes and nations out in the Middle East did for their own spiritual practices. So what you could see maybe would be people starting to develop a much more clear-minded approach for their own spiritual practices. Like the Enlightenment movement itself did not stop witchcraft in England. Okay, it did not, because whether it's done subversively or whether it's done overtly, this whole sort of like use of pagan ideas and religion and superstition mixed together with like spiritual healing and energy work and all that kind of stuff was basically still going on. So the Enlightenment didn't stop it. And of course Alphonse Louis Constant wrote before the Rosetta Stone was discovered in 1799, I think. Okay. So everything that was before the Rosetta Stone would be people like developing their own like personal or group or cult or culture intuitive understanding of, let's say, the old cartouches and all the rest of it. And they didn't move on to intellectual academic understanding. Now, with the development of the Enlightenment movement and the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, you would have thought that like everyone within the occultic world and spiritual worlds and New Age worlds and all the rest of it would then be thinking, oh, we can now look with facts at basically what's really out there. But they didn't. Okay? So Alphonse Louis Constant, Eliphas Levi, one of basically the founding fathers of the witchcraft movement, if you think about it, who was the first person who changed the meaning of the pentagram. Okay, so it became associated with something more occultic, more to do with either devil worship if it's horns uppermost, or good if it's like horns downwards and the point up, if you know what I mean. Which eventually like translated itself into like 1966, LaVey, Church of Satan, all that kind of stuff, with the idea of it being satanic when the points were above, right? Which is essentially isn't the case, because the pentagram has been used in like every single culture, pretty much, including Christian cultures, meaning like the 5 wounds of Christ, or like 5 virtuous women in the Old Testament, or something crazy like that. Okay, so all that kind of stuff happened before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, but the previous understanding carried on, but it was built on in different ways. So it still became intuitive, it still became contemplatory. Okay, Enlightenment, the Enlightenment movement, and academic discoveries did to a certain extent create a few new movements, because people could then create their own little witchcraft groups based upon some things that were factually done way, way, way back in the day in ancient Babylonia and so on and so forth, but not in every respect. So when the witchcraft religion from 1950s onwards, we're talking about Gardner and Sanders and the rest of those wonderful people, started to develop their spirituality, their religion, their methods became a bit more of a hodgepodge, because a lot of the symbolism was actually taken from Christian groups. The inverted pentagram for the first degree, we all know that was like a first degree Masonic thing. then that came from Masonry, which came before Freemasonry. Because Masonry itself was just a Christian cult, it became Freemasonry when they let anyone of any religion in, okay, to become part of the whole thing. And so now it's like involved, you know, it's now a witchcraft symbol. So the whole, I suppose what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the things that people think is like true and authentic and traditional essentially isn't. And I think we got to look back further than how far people look back in order to try and work out what was really true and all the rest of it. The whole mythology that tarot, for instance, had some kind of connection to ancient Egypt, that, you know, it's been severely debunked. I mean, severely debunked. But people are still saying that tarot comes from ancient Egypt. There's no evidence to support that at all. The symbolism of the tarot is like predominantly New Testament stuff from the Triumph Procession in ancient Rome, celebrating the victory of Christianity over paganism. Okay, it's not to do with ancient Egypt and the mysteries of the temples, or, you know, even like the Wailing Wall. Some authors suggested that the imagery of the tarot came from the temple in Jerusalem, you know, the Jewish temple, which would be weird, okay, considering that we've got New Testament Book of Revelation's imagery in it, which wasn't really present, as far as I remember, in all of the Jewish writings. So, you know, you're probably approaching this video thinking like, what, is Nick having a go at me? No. What I'm doing is I'm trying to point out that there's things which you think right now, which are your current perceptions, which aren't necessarily 100% accurate. And maybe it's worthwhile using a bit of Enlightenment thinking and a bit of like proper archaeology and proper like science to look at where your views come from about the meanings of symbols. Because we are still in a period in history when it is the pre-Rosetta Stone information and ideas and beliefs which is out there, compounded by the groupthink and values and opinions of people acting politically, okay, to strengthen the power and resolve of particular groups. And I just want to leave you with that thought right now, because I think it's really important that we like grow as like a nation, a society, a culture, and a century, to stop absorbing essentially both ancient and modern fake news. Do you think you can do that with me? Speak to you soon.